In the heart of Kumasi, Ghana, the morning sun rose gently, and so did Zanele's hopes. It was her birthday and she was sure her husband, Sipho, had planned something special. He had always forgotten little things but never her birthday. This year he was different. He handed her a beautiful, gold-trimmed envelope with a small smile. Zanele's heart skipped. Maybe a spa day? A trip? A love letter? Her fingers trembled with excitement as she opened it. But the smile on her face faded quickly. Inside were cold, printed words. Petition for divorce. For a few seconds, she just stared. No warning. No signs. No explanation. Just the sharp sting of betrayal written in black and white. She looked up, confused, thinking this had to be a joke. But Sipho was already walking away, like it meant nothing. The room felt smaller. Her chest tightened. Tears filled her eyes but didn't fall yet. She was too shocked. Her birthday, a day that should have started with joy, had turned into the worst morning of her life. All she had now was silence, confusion, and a broken heart. She sat down slowly, the envelope still in her hand, like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. The roses on the table suddenly looked fake. The breakfast he had ordered now felt like poison. Zanele's world had just fallen apart, and she didn't even know why. But deep inside, something stronger than pain was already beginning to rise. That night, Zanele sat alone in her bedroom, still holding the divorce papers like they might suddenly disappear. She hadn't cried all day, but now the tears wouldn't stop. Her hands were shaking. Her heart felt like it had been cut open. She kept asking herself why. What did I do wrong? But the answers didn't come. She picked up her phone, hoping maybe to find a message, a reason, anything. Instead, she found something worse. Her best friend Lindy's face flashed across the screen. A photo. No, many photos. Lindy and Sipho were holding hands, smiling like they had just won the lottery. One picture showed them on a beach, another at a fancy dinner. But the worst was the caption. Finally with the love of my life. Zanele stared at the screen, frozen. Her best friend. The woman she laughed with, cried with, trusted with everything. She had been with Sipho behind her back. The pain hit her all over again. It wasn't just betrayal from a husband, but from the friend she thought was like a sister. And now they weren't even hiding it. They were planning to get married. The wedding posts had already started. Everyone in their circle could see. The shame felt unbearable. Her chest hurt. She wanted to scream, to disappear. She felt like her whole life had been a lie. But in the middle of that heartbreak, something shifted. The tears slowed down. Her hands stopped shaking. And for the first time that day, she took a deep breath. If they thought this would break her, they were wrong. They had taken everything from her, but they hadn't taken her strength. She looked in the mirror and wiped her face. Okay, she whispered. Let's see how this story ends. Zanele sat on the edge of her bed. The room still dark even though the sun had already set. Her phone lay next to her, silent for hours. She had cried so much, her eyes were swollen and red. Her heart was heavy, her world felt empty. Everything had changed in one day. Her marriage, her friendship, her trust in people. Just as she was about to switch off her phone and curl up under the covers, it started to ring. At first, she didn't want to answer. But something told her to pick it up. Hello, she said softly. Miss Zanele Moyo? A voice asked on the other side. This is Mr. Kamau, your late uncle's lawyer from Nairobi. Zanele sat up a little straighter. She hadn't heard that name in years. Her uncle had been a businessman, but they had lost touch when she got married. The lawyer continued. I'm calling with some important news. Your uncle left a large share of his company to you. You are now the owner of 80% of Vuma Holdings. Zanele blinked, confused. I don't understand. You are now the majority shareholder, Miss Moyo. Congratulations. Her heart stopped for a second. Vuma Holdings. That was the same multinational company where her husband Sipho worked. The same company he bragged about in meetings, the one he said he would rise in. And now she owned most of it. Zanele couldn't speak. She sat there in silence, her tears now replaced by shock. A strange feeling began to rise inside her. Not sadness, not anger, but power. She looked around the room. The same room where she had felt so broken just hours ago. Everything was changing. Everything. She ended the call politely and sat still, letting the news sink in. Sipho had given her divorce papers. He had taken her heart, her peace, her trust. But fate had just handed her something even bigger. She smiled for the first time that day. Not because of revenge, but because the game had just changed, and this time, she was in control. Zanele stepped off the plane in Nairobi with quiet confidence. Just days ago, she had been heartbroken, abandoned, and betrayed. But now something inside her had changed. She went straight to the lawyer's office, signed the documents, and became the majority shareholder of Vuma Holdings, one of the biggest companies in East Africa. Everything was official. The company her late uncle had built with hard work and vision was now in her hands. It still didn't feel real. But deep down, she knew this was not just luck. It was destiny. She wasn't going to waste it. Later that day, dressed in a smart suit and heels, she walked into the tall glass building of Vuma Holdings. Nobody recognized her yet. She moved quietly through the halls with the lawyer beside her, heading straight to the top floor. Inside the boardroom, a high-level meeting was already going on. Executives were talking. And there, sitting at the table like a king, was Sipho, her husband, the same man who had left her on her birthday without a single explanation. He was busy giving orders, speaking proudly about sales and performance, acting like the future was his. Suddenly, the chairman of the board stood up and cleared his throat. The room went silent. "Before we continue," he said, "please welcome our new majority shareholder, Mrs. Zanele Moyo." Every head turned. Zanele stepped forward calmly. Sipho looked up and dropped his coffee. The cup hit the table and spilled everywhere. His face went pale. He opened his mouth but no words came out. His wife, the woman he had discarded like trash, was now the boss. The entire boardroom froze in shock. Zanele didn't smile. She didn't say a word. She simply pulled out a chair and took her seat at the head of the table. The message was clear. She was no longer the woman left behind. She was the one now leading the room. The next morning, Zanele walked into the office with purpose. She had spent the night going through every report, every file, every detail about Sipho's work at Vuma Holdings. What she found shocked her: missed deadlines, poor leadership, lost clients. Behind all his big words and confident meetings, Sipho had been doing a terrible job. He had been protected by his position, but not anymore. Zanele was no longer just a wife. She was the boss. And she was ready to act. She called an emergency board meeting. Everyone arrived quickly, curious and nervous. Sipho walked in last, still trying to act like nothing had changed. He sat down across from her, but she didn't even look at him at first. She simply opened the folder in front of her and began to read. One by one, she listed every failure, every mistake, every time he let the company down. Her voice was calm, but her words cut deep. The room was silent. No one dared to interrupt. Sipho started to sweat. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but she held up her hand and stopped him. Then with a cold and steady voice she said, "Your services are no longer required. Consider this your final birthday gift." The same exact words he had written in the divorce papers. There was a long silence. Then Sipho pushed his chair back, his face full of shock and anger, and stormed out of the room. He didn't even look back. Word spread fast. Downstairs in the lobby, Linda, who had come hoping to meet him, heard the news. She turned quickly and left before anyone could see her. Zanele closed her folder, stood up, and walked out of the boardroom without another word. Everyone watched her with respect, and maybe a little fear. She had walked through betrayal and heartbreak, but now she stood tall, stronger than ever. The woman they thought was broken had just taken back her power, and ended her silence with the loudest statement of all. Zanele never expected her life to become a headline, but within days, the world knew her story. It started with one short video from the boardroom. A clip showing her calmly firing Sipho, the man who gave her divorce papers on her birthday. Someone posted it with the caption, "Wife dumped on her birthday, now owns her ex's company." That one post exploded. Within hours, it had thousands of shares. By the next morning, it had made its way onto major news pages, blogs, and social media platforms across Africa, and soon the world. TV stations started calling nonstop. Everyone wanted to hear from the woman who turned heartbreak into power. Radio presenters were talking about her courage. Podcast hosts were analyzing her journey. Zanele, once just a quiet businesswoman with a small following of 2,000, watched her social media grow overnight. First 100K, then 500K. By the end of the week, she had over 4 million followers. Her inbox was full of messages from women saying, "You gave me strength, and you reminded me who I am." Strangers were calling her an icon, a legend, and a true queen. Sipho, on the other hand, vanished. He refused all calls from journalists. His friends said he was laying low. He deactivated his social media after people flooded his posts with laughing emojis and comments like, "You played yourself." He had gone from a proud husband and employee to the face of betrayal, and now, embarrassment. But while the world was celebrating her revenge, Zanele remained calm. She wasn't doing this for likes or fame. She didn't post long rants or victory dances. She simply posted a photo of herself in her office, holding a coffee mug that said, "CO. Period." That one photo got millions of likes. She didn't need to explain anything. The world already knew. Zanele had turned pain into power. And without even trying, she had become a legend. A few days after the world saw Zanele rise from heartbreak to power, someone from her past tried to come back. Lindime. The same Lindime who had betrayed her, smiled in her face, laughed with her, cried with her, and all the while, was secretly in a relationship with her husband. Now that Zanele had become a viral sensation and a symbol of strength, Lindime wanted to apologize. She thought maybe a sorry would fix everything. But it was too late. First, a delivery arrived at Zanele's office. Roses, expensive ones, with a note that simply said, "I'm sorry." Zanele barely looked at it. Then came a long, emotional letter. Lindime had written pages and pages about how she missed their friendship, how guilty she felt, how it was a moment of weakness and not love. She begged for a second chance, even if it was just to sit and talk. She said she didn't want to lose the one friend who truly knew her. And finally, she asked if they could meet just once, so she could explain herself in person. Zanele read the letter slowly, every word. But there were no tears this time. No anger either. She just sat there quietly. She didn't remember the pain. She remembered how she survived it, and how she turned that pain into something powerful. The next day, she sent back a single card with one sentence written in perfect, neat handwriting. "Don't mistake silence for weakness. I was just busy building an empire." That was it. No more. No less. The message hit harder than any argument. It was calm but powerful. Cold but honest. And just like everything Zanele did, it went viral. People started reposting it with fire emojis. Women added it to their bios. It became a quote on t-shirts, Instagram captions, and TikToks. Because Zanele didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for every woman who had been betrayed, stayed silent, and came back stronger. And Lindime? She never replied again. Because deep down, she knew Zanele's silence had already said everything that needed to be said. The annual Vuma Holdings Gala in Lagos was the biggest event of the year. The ballroom sparkled with lights, cameras flashed, and top business leaders from all over Africa arrived in style. But this year, everyone was waiting for one person, Zanele. She wasn't just a guest, she was the guest of honor. As she stepped onto the red carpet, all eyes turned. She wore a royal Kent gown that flowed like fire and gold, with confidence in every step. Reporters shouted her name, cameras clicked non-stop, and guests whispered, "That's her. That's the woman who made history." The music faded, and it was time for speeches. When Zanele walked up to the stage, the room went silent. She smiled calmly, then began to speak. She talked about loyalty, about how betrayal doesn't break you. It shows you who truly belongs in your life. She spoke of strength, how silence can be the loudest power, and how pain pushed her to rise higher. "They tried to bury me," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But they didn't know I was a seed." The crowd erupted into applause. Some people stood. Some had tears in their eyes. Her speech wasn't just inspiring, it was unforgettable. But the moment that shocked everyone came later. As waiters moved around the room serving drinks, someone whispered, "Is that Sipho?" Heads turned. And there he was, Zanele's ex-husband, dressed in a waiter's uniform, holding a tray of champagne flutes. The same man who once handed her divorce papers on her birthday was now quietly weaving between tables, trying not to be seen. But Zanele saw him. She didn't blink. She didn't frown. She simply locked eyes with him for a brief second, then turned back to her conversation, smiling like a queen who had already won. Because she had. The guests knew. The staff knew. Karma had walked into that ballroom wearing heels and a crown. And its name was Zanele. Late one evening, after a long day of meetings and media interviews, Zanele sat quietly in her office. The lights of the city glowed through the window, but her mind was somewhere else. Back to that morning in Kumasi, when everything fell apart. The birthday. The envelope. The betrayal. She remembered how broken she felt, how she cried in silence, thinking her world had ended. But now, she had climbed out of that pain and built something powerful. So she picked up her pen and began to write. Not to the world, but to the woman she once was. She wrote a letter to her past self. It began with, "To the woman who got divorce papers on her birthday." Her words were soft but strong. She told herself not to cry, not to feel small, and not to beg for answers. She wrote, "You're not being rejected. You're being redirected to greatness." She reminded her past self that sometimes pain is the door to purpose. That silence is not weakness. That love once lost can return in a stronger form, self-love. She ended the letter with hope, not bitterness. When Zanele posted it online, she didn't expect much. But within hours, it spread like wildfire. Women across Africa reposted it with the hashtag from divorce to director. Some shared their own stories of heartbreak and healing. Others wrote that her words gave them strength to walk away from toxic love, or start over with pride. News outlets picked it up. Even celebrities reposted the letter. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was honest. And that honesty moved millions. Zanele didn't just inspire with her power. She inspired with her pain. Because she didn't hide it, she transformed it. And in doing so, she lit a fire in every woman who had ever felt discarded or forgotten. Her story, her letter, and her journey had now become a movement. Exactly 1 year after the worst birthday of her life, Zanele decided to close the chapter in her own special way. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just prepared a small brown package and sent it to one address, Sipho's. Inside the box, she placed 3 things. The first was a printed copy of the letter that had fired him from Vuma Holdings, the very company he once felt powerful in. The second item was a photo, beautifully framed, showing Zanele standing tall and proud, holding the company's plaque with her name on it as the majority shareholder. She was smiling in the photo, confident, calm, and glowing with victory. And the third item? A simple birthday card. It read, "Happy birthday. I kept the receipts." No explanation. No drama. Just those 6 words that said everything. The same man who once handed her divorce papers on her birthday, now received a quiet reminder that life had turned completely around, and not in his favor. Zanele didn't wait for a reaction. She didn't care for one. After sealing the package, she grabbed her suitcase and headed to the airport. Her next chapter was already waiting for her. A new business. A new brand. A fresh start in Cape Town. As she boarded the flight, she looked out the window and smiled. Not because she had gotten revenge, but because she had chosen herself. This was not just an ending. It was a new beginning. One filled with freedom, power, and peace. And the world? Still watching. Still inspired. Because Zanele didn't just rise, she flew.